In the previous video, we covered property binding, which is a square bracket notation, which allows us to bind to particular properties on an element. So let's say our input, we want to actually listen for changes and update this value here. So what we're going to do in this example is actually remove this piece of code, and we're going to learn how to use event binding. Now, event binding uses a slightly different syntax than property binding. So it's clear when you look at a component's template what's actually happening. So we can see here that we have a value that we're property binding to. However, when we want to listen to events, we use a slightly different syntax. Now, for the purposes of this video, I'm going to put these on new lines to make this a little bit clearer and easier to read. Now, an input has multiple events, as you probably well know. Events such as input, change, blur, focus, and a few others. So let's assume that we want to listen to a blur event. Instead of using square brackets, we use these normal brackets. So all we do inside of here is just type blur. Now you can see instantly by looking at this component that we have a binding here and an event here. So this syntax is really nice for instantly looking at what's happening in your templates. Now when a blur event actually fires, we need to pass it a function. So inside of here, we can create a function perhaps called handle blur. Now the interesting thing is we need to call this function and we can ask for this $event object. This handle blur function will actually throw an error if it doesn't exist on our component. So what we can do is create our function here. So we'll do handle blur. We'll expect the event back through the function arguments. For the sake of the video, what we're going to do is call it any. So any is a TypeScript type that just allows us to pass any kind of object through the function arguments instead of a specific event object. Now inside of here, what we're going to do is do console.log, and then we're going to do event. This event will actually give us the entire input itself. So when we go ahead and check this out in the browser, we'll actually see this working. So inside the browser, I'm actually going to leave the DevTools open so you can actually see this blur event occurring. So if I type motto, nothing happens. Once I click out of there, we then get this focus event. Now we can expand all of these, and you've probably seen some of these before. The one that we're interested in is this target property here. So you can see that when I hover over input, it's actually highlighting it in the DOM. So we can do target, and we can scroll down, and we can find the value property. Now the value is what we actually want to hook into. So you can see here that we have value with the new value inside of motto. So at this point, our handle blur function can then update the other listeners, for instance here, in our particular component. So what we're actually going to do here is go back inside of here, and once the blur event happens, we'll do this.name equals event.target.value. Now this will actually then take that value and assign it to this.name. So let's go and try this out in the browser. Again, I can type my surname, and then when we blur, we then have this updated value here, and obviously the event has then been logged out as well. So this gives you an example of event binding. So let's go ahead and create a few others. One typical event that we probably want to listen to on an input is the actual input event itself. So we're going to create handle input. This is also going to ask for the $event object. So inside handle input, we're pretty much going to do the same thing as before. So all we're going to do is update the value. So we're going to have the event, and it's going to be of type any. And we're going to say this.name equals event.target.value. So what will happen here is that when we actually start typing, because Angular is binding to this input and listening for an input event, it will then call our event handler on an input, which is when a user actually types. So each time we're going to get event.target back from the handle input event. So in the browser, we can go ahead, we can say Todd motto, and you can see as I type that the interpolated values below are actually being updated. So this gives you an example of what looks like two-way data binding. However, it's one-way data flow with an event being emitted from a particular component or an element, and it's telling our component that a change has occurred, and we're just updating a value of which Angular's change detection mechanism will go and update the other listeners, such as this one here. So when we make a change, all of what I've just explained is happening behind the scenes. One of the most common events that you'll probably want to listen to is a click event. So let's go ahead and create a button. As you can expect, we listen to a click event. And inside of here, we'll do change name. Now, we're not actually going to pass an event through, so we'll create this handle click, but we'll just simply call it. So when we go down to our component, we can add this property. It doesn't have any function arguments, and we can say this.name equals motto. So whenever we click, it's going to run this function, it's going to update to motto, and as the one-way data flow is happening and the data binding here, both of these are then going to receive an update from this component class down into the template. We can start typing as usual. Now, if I click change name, you'll see that it's just changed both of these. So this gives you an example of the one-way data flow and the events that are being tied in together when we're creating Angular applications.